Grandpa is dead, Dad. And before you ask, no, you're not getting anything. Those were the first words my daughter said to me at 7:12 on a Tuesday morning. No hello. No trembling voice. Not even a moment of silence for the man who had carried her on his shoulders when she was 6 years old. Just that. Grandpa was dead. And I got nothing. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone against my ear while rain tapped softly against the windows. My daughter Natalie continued. I know this is going to hurt, but Grandpa's will is very clear. The lake house, his investments, the property in Virginia, all of it comes to me. Then I heard her husband, Eric, laughing somewhere behind her. Tell him about the deadline. Natalie hesitated. That hesitation told me there was still a small piece of my daughter buried underneath whatever greed had taken hold of her. But it disappeared quickly. You need to leave the lake house by Friday, Dad. I looked across the kitchen table and smiled, because sitting 6 feet away from me was the supposedly dead man himself. My father, Walter Bennett, 89 years old, wearing plaid pajamas and spreading strawberry jam across a piece of toast. He lifted his eyes toward me. I put the phone on speaker. Eric's voice immediately filled the kitchen. And don't start causing problems, Richard. Walter is gone. Natalie is the legal beneficiary now. That house isn't yours. My father slowly stopped spreading the jam. For nearly 60 years, that house had been his pride. He had built the first 2 rooms himself after returning from the Navy, then expanded it piece by piece as our family grew. Natalie had spent every childhood summer there. Now she was discussing it before her grandfather was even supposedly buried. Dad leaned toward the phone. For one terrifying second, I thought he was going to speak. Instead, he reached for the notepad beside my coffee and wrote 4 words. Ask about the funeral. I swallowed. When is the funeral? Silence. Then Natalie sighed. We're not having one. Dad's expression changed. Eric answered instead. Funerals are a waste of money. We're doing a direct cremation tomorrow morning. I stared at my father. He stared back at me. And then, incredibly, the old man smiled. Not warmly. Not happily. It was the smile I remembered from childhood, the one that appeared whenever somebody underestimated him. He wrote another sentence. This time, he turned the pad toward me slowly. Don't tell them I'm alive. My stomach tightened. I looked at him as if he had lost his mind. But Dad placed one finger against his lips. On the speaker, Natalie said, Dad, are you still there? I looked at the man they believed was dead. Then I finally understood what he wanted. Yes, I whispered. I'm still here. What Natalie didn't know was that her grandfather hadn't died. He had disappeared. And the reason he disappeared was about to expose something far worse than greed. I ended the call without arguing. That was the part Natalie would later remember most. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse her of being heartless. I didn't ask how a granddaughter could discuss property before asking how her grandfather had died. I simply said, I understand. Then I hung up. Dad took another bite of toast. You always were terrible at lying, he said. And you're supposed to be dead. Then I suppose nobody can complain about my table manners. I almost laughed, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't let me. 3 days earlier, my father had appeared at my door carrying 1 suitcase and an old leather folder. No warning. No explanation. He had driven nearly 4 hours from his lake house, despite the fact that I had spent the last year begging him not to drive long distances alone. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted, but not frightened. Walter Bennett had never been easily frightened. He had survived a war, buried his wife after 54 years of marriage, recovered from 2 heart surgeries, and once chased a black bear away from our trash cans with nothing but a garden rake. But that night, something was different. He kept looking toward the street. Dad, what happened? He walked past me and locked the door. Then he handed me the leather folder. Inside were bank statements, property records, copies of checks, and several documents carrying Natalie's signature. At first, none of it made sense. Then Dad pointed to 3 withdrawals from one of his investment accounts. $28,000, $41,000, then $65,000, all within 7 months. I didn't authorize those, he said. My mouth went dry. Are you saying Natalie stole from you? Dad shook his head. I'm saying I don't know yet. That distinction mattered to him. Even then. Even with the evidence sitting between us, He refused to condemn his granddaughter before he knew the whole truth. But there was something else. 2 weeks earlier, Natalie and Eric had visited him. They brought groceries, cleaned the kitchen, made dinner. Then Eric casually suggested that Dad should update his financial power of attorney in case something happened. Dad refused. The next morning, he found an unsigned document beside his printer. A new power of attorney, giving Natalie control over almost everything. I never printed it, Dad told me. That was when he decided to leave. Not because he believed Natalie wanted him dead. Not yet. He left because he wanted to discover what she would do if she thought he was no longer standing in her way. And somehow, less than 72 hours after he disappeared from the lake house, my daughter had called to announce his death. I looked at Dad across the kitchen. How did she even convince herself you were dead? He closed the leather folder. That, he said quietly, is what we're going to find out. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Natalie. The lawyer will be at Grandpa's house at noon. Be there if you want to hear the will. Dad read it over my shoulder. For the first time that morning, his smile disappeared. Good, he said. Go. I stared at him. Without you? He nodded. Especially without me. Then he reached inside the leather folder and pulled out an envelope I hadn't seen before. My name was written across the front. Take this, he said. But whatever happens in that house. He pushed the envelope into my hand. Do not open it until Natalie lies. At 11:45, I parked across the street from Dad's lake house. Natalie's silver SUV was already in the driveway. Eric's black Mercedes sat beside it. Seeing both cars there made something inside me sink. They hadn't come to mourn. They had come prepared. I slipped Dad's envelope into the inside pocket of my jacket and walked toward the house. Natalie opened the door before I could knock. She wore a black dress, pearl earrings, and the expression of someone trying very hard to look devastated. Dad. She hugged me. I didn't hug her back. She pulled away. You okay? My father died 3 days ago. What do you think? Her eyes dropped for half a second. Right, of course. That tiny hesitation bothered me more than anything else. Inside, Eric stood near the fireplace scrolling through his phone. No flowers. No photographs of Grandpa. No sign that anyone had spent even 5 minutes remembering the man they claimed was dead. Instead, there were folders spread across the dining table. Property documents, bank statements, and a real estate brochure. I stared at it. Natalie quickly turned it face down. We're just trying to handle everything efficiently. Efficiently? Grandpa wouldn't want us dragging this out. I almost smiled. Dad was probably sitting in my kitchen at that exact moment, drinking coffee and complaining that I had bought the cheap brand. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Natalie's entire posture changed. That'll be Mr. Collins. The man who entered was in his early 60s, carrying a worn leather briefcase. I recognized him immediately. Daniel Collins had been Dad's attorney for more than 20 years. He shook my hand. Then Natalie's. But something about the way he looked at me told me he knew more than he was saying. We sat around the dining table. Eric didn't bother hiding his impatience. So can we get to the inheritance part? Natalie shot him a look. What? We're all thinking it. No, I said quietly. We're not. Mr. Collins opened his briefcase. Before we discuss Walter Bennett's estate, I need to clarify something. Natalie leaned forward. Eric finally put down his phone. Mr. Collins looked directly at my daughter. Natalie, when did you last speak to your grandfather? She didn't hesitate. 3 days ago. My pulse quickened. And what did he say? He sounded weak, confused. I felt the envelope against my chest. Dad's instruction echoed in my mind. Do not open it until Natalie lies. Mr. Collins continued. Was anyone else present? Natalie glanced at Eric. No. There it was. The lie. Because Dad had already told me exactly what happened during that final conversation. And he hadn't been alone. I reached inside my jacket. Natalie noticed. What are you doing? I placed Dad's envelope on the table. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. The color seemed to drain from her cheeks. Where did you get that? I looked at her. Why? She swallowed. I'm just asking. Mr. Collins leaned back without saying a word. That was when I understood. He knew about the envelope. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No will. No bank information. Just a handwritten message from my father. I recognized his uneven block letters immediately. If Natalie says she spoke to me alone, ask her about the man standing beside me. Underneath was an address. And a name. Samuel Reed. Eric suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. But Natalie didn't move. For the first time since I entered the house, my daughter looked genuinely frightened. I folded the note. Who is Samuel Reed? She stared at me. I have no idea. Mr. Collins closed his briefcase. That, he said, would be your second lie. And suddenly, nobody in that room cared about the will anymore. Natalie looked at Mr. Collins as though he had slapped her. What are you talking about? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed a thin blue folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Eric stepped behind Natalie. This meeting is over. No, I said. Now it's finally beginning. Natalie turned toward me. Dad, you don't understand what's happening. Then explained Samuel Reed. Silence. Mr. Collins opened the folder. Samuel Reed is a licensed private investigator. My eyes moved to him. A private investigator? Walter hired him 6 weeks ago. Natalie's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Eric's expression changed, too. That was when I knew. Whatever Dad had discovered, Eric knew at least part of it. Mr. Collins continued. Walter became concerned after noticing irregular activity in his accounts. He asked Mr. Reed to determine whether someone had gained unauthorized access to his financial information. Natalie shook her head. Grandpa was confused. He forgot things. No, I said. He was 79, Dad. And alive. That stopped her. For one dangerous second, I thought I had revealed too much. But Natalie seemed to hear it as anger rather than fact. She looked away. Mr. Collins slid a photograph across the table. I picked it up. It showed Dad outside a bank. Beside him stood a tall man in a gray coat. Samuel Reed. The date printed in the corner was from 3 days earlier. The same day Natalie claimed she had spoken to Dad alone. My stomach tightened. What happened that day? Mr. Collins looked at Natalie. Perhaps she should tell you. Natalie's voice hardened. I don't have to explain myself. You told me Grandpa died, I said. You told me there was no inheritance. You brought me here to hear a will for a man whose death you haven't even explained. I was trying to protect you. From what? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then Eric made the mistake that changed everything. Walter wasn't supposed to leave the house that morning. The room went still. Natalie slowly turned toward him. I stared. How would you know that? Eric's face drained. I meant. No, I said. You knew where he was. Natalie grabbed his arm. Stop talking. And suddenly I remembered Dad's words from 3 nights earlier. I left. Because I wanted to see what they would do if they thought I was no longer standing in their way. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. Something had happened at that lake house. Something they believed had removed Walter Bennett permanently. Mr. Collins reached into the folder again. This time, he pulled out a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a silver key. Natalie stood so quickly her chair scraped backward. Where did you get that? Mr. Collins studied her. Samuel found it in Walter's garage. Eric whispered something under his breath. I picked up the bag. A tiny number was engraved on the key. 37. What does it open? Nobody answered. But Natalie was staring at it like it could destroy her life. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Dad. Only 4 words. Ask about the storage unit. I raised my eyes to my daughter. And for the first time, I saw fear replace greed, completely. What's in Unit 3017, Natalie? Natalie didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her face had already told me that Unit 317 mattered. Eric moved toward the front door. I'm done with this. Mr. Collins stood. I wouldn't leave. Eric stopped. Why? Because Samuel Reed is waiting at the storage facility. Natalie stared at him. You set us up. Mr. Collins remained calm. No, Walter did. For a second, I forgot how carefully I needed to play my part. Hearing Dad's name spoken like that almost made me smile. Natalie noticed. What's funny? Nothing. She studied me, suspicious now. Then she grabbed her purse. Fine. Let's go see whatever Grandpa was hiding. 20 minutes later, we pulled into a storage facility outside town. Unit 3017 sat at the end of a narrow row of metal doors. A tall man in a gray coat waited beside it. Samuel Reed. He shook my hand, then looked at Natalie. We've met before. Natalie's jaw tightened. I don't remember you. Samuel gave a humorless smile. I remember you. Mr. Collins handed him the silver key. The lock clicked. The metal door rattled upward. I expected boxes. Furniture. Maybe documents. Instead, there was a desk. A chair. A small safe. And mounted above the desk was a security monitor. Eric whispered, "What the hell?" Samuel walked inside. Your father rented this unit 2 months ago. He looked at me. After money began disappearing. Natalie crossed her arms. You dragged us here for a few bank statements? No. Samuel pressed a button. The monitor came alive. Grainy footage appeared. Dad's lake house. His kitchen. The date was from 6 weeks earlier. Natalie entered the frame. Eric followed her. Dad wasn't home. I turned toward them. Neither spoke. On screen, Natalie opened Dad's desk drawer, while Eric searched a cabinet. Then Eric found something. A small notebook. He handed it to Natalie. She photographed several pages with her phone. My stomach twisted. What was in that notebook? Samuel answered. Account information, property details, security questions. Natalie suddenly pointed at the screen. That proves nothing. Grandpa asked me to help with his finances. Samuel changed the video. Another date. This time Dad was home. Natalie sat across from him, while Eric stood near the counter. The audio crackled. Then my daughter's voice filled the unit. Just sign it, Grandpa. It makes things easier. Dad pushed a document away. No. Eric stepped closer. You're making this harder than it needs to be. My hands curled into fists. But Samuel wasn't finished. He switched to another recording. 3 days earlier. The morning Dad disappeared. There he was, standing in his garage beside Samuel. Alive. Alert. And clearly not confused. Natalie went pale. Then, Dad's recorded voice came through the speakers. If you're watching this, someone has probably told my son I'm dead. My heart stopped. Natalie backed away from the monitor. Dad continued. I suspected they might. Eric rushed toward the power cord. Samuel blocked him. Don't. The recording continued. But stolen money isn't why I disappeared. I looked at Samuel. What does that mean? He didn't answer. On screen, Dad lifted a thick red folder. The money was bait. Natalie made a broken sound behind me. Dad looked directly into the camera. What I needed to know was how far my family would go once they believed they could control everything I owned. Then he opened the folder. And unfortunately, he paused. They went much further than I expected. The screen went black. A second later, Samuel placed the real red folder on the desk. Natalie whispered, Please don't open that. I looked at my daughter. For the first time, she wasn't demanding anything. She was begging. So I opened it. The first page wasn't a bank statement. It was a death certificate. Walter Bennett. My father's name. His date of birth. His home address. And beneath them, a date of death from 3 days earlier. For several seconds I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the word stamped across the top. Draft. I looked at Natalie. You prepared Grandpa's death certificate? Her eyes filled with tears. Dad, please. Before he was dead? Eric stepped forward. It wasn't like that. I laughed once. There was no humor in it. I'm getting tired of hearing that sentence. Samuel removed another document from the folder. This draft was created 12 days ago. My stomach turned. 12 days. My daughter had been preparing for my father's death while he was still making coffee, driving to the hardware store, and complaining about baseball on television. Natalie shook her head desperately. You don't understand. Grandpa was old. We were preparing paperwork. For what? She looked at Eric. That was answer enough. I turned another page. A property valuation. Dad's lake house. Estimated value, $1.4 million. Then another. A proposed listing agreement. Then another. A spreadsheet dividing projected proceeds. Mortgage payoff. Taxes. Legal fees. And 2 names at the bottom. Natalie Bennett. Eric Dawson. Mine wasn't there. Neither was Dad's. You planned to sell his house. Natalie finally snapped. He wasn't using it. The words echoed through the storage unit. She froze. So did I. Samuel said nothing. I stepped closer. He lived there. Yule ferried evolutions. He could barely maintain it anymore. He planted tomatoes behind that house last spring. He was 79. And that made it yours? Her face twisted. You have no idea what it's like watching all that money sit there while we're drowning. There it was. Not grief. Not confusion. The truth. Eric grabbed her arm. Natalie stopped. She pulled away. No, I'm tired of pretending. Her voice cracked. We have debt, Dad. Serious debt. Eric's business failed. The house is behind on payments. We needed help. You could have asked. I did. No, you asked Grandpa. And he said no. The anger in her voice frightened me more than the documents. I suddenly understood what Dad had been testing. Not whether Natalie loved money, whether desperation had erased the line she once believed she would never cross. I turned another page. Then stopped. It was a life insurance application. Dad's name was listed as the insured. Natalie as beneficiary. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the signature. Walter Bennett. My father's signature. Except, I had watched him sign birthday cards, checks, and school forms my entire life. This wasn't his handwriting. I looked at Samuel. Did Dad sign this? No. Natalie whispered. I can explain. I stared at her. You forged his signature? She began crying. Real tears this time. Then Samuel reached for the final document. You haven't seen the worst part. Eric suddenly lunged for the folder. Samuel caught his wrist. Mr. Collins stepped between them, and one folded sheet slipped onto the concrete floor. I bent down and picked it up. It wasn't financial paperwork. It was a handwritten schedule. Dad's schedule. Doctor appointments. Grocery trips. Church. Even the mornings he walked beside the lake. And one entry had been circled in red. Tuesday, 7:15 a.m. Alone. 3 days ago. The morning Dad disappeared. I looked at Natalie. Then Eric. And finally I understood why my father had been watching the street when he arrived at my house. He hadn't simply been hiding from greedy relatives. He believed someone had been waiting for him. I lowered the paper. What were you planning to do to him Tuesday morning? Natalie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Eric answered for her. Nothing. I held up the schedule. Then why was my father's routine written down? We were worried about him. People who are worried call. They visit. They don't circle the exact time an old man will be alone. Natalie covered her face. Dad, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. The sentence chilled me. But wasn't. Eric turned on her. Don't. She looked at him, and something passed between them. Fear. Not guilt. Fear. Samuel quietly reached into the red folder. There's something you should hear. He placed a small recorder on the desk. Eric's face changed instantly. Where did you get that? Samuel pressed play. At first, all I heard was the hum of a car engine. Then Natalie's voice. If he signs the power of attorney, none of this matters. Eric answered. And if he doesn't? A pause. Then my daughter spoke again. We make him understand he can't live alone anymore. My chest tightened. Eric's recorded voice followed. And if he fights us? Another pause. Longer this time. Then we call the ambulance and tell them he's confused. I looked at Natalie. She was crying silently now. The recording continued. They had never planned to kill him. Somehow, that didn't make it much better. They planned to corner him during his morning walk, bring him home, pressure him into signing control of his finances, and if he refused, claim his memory had deteriorated. Eric had even researched assisted living facilities. Not for care. For leverage. You were going to have him declared incompetent? Natalie shook her head. Only if he wouldn't listen. I felt something inside me break. Listen to what? You? We were desperate. So you decided his age made him disposable? No. Her voice echoed off the metal walls. Then, Samuel stopped the recording. That morning Walter knew they were coming. I turned toward him. How? Because I told him. Samuel had been watching Eric for days. He saw him drive past Dad's house twice Monday night. So Tuesday morning, instead of walking beside the lake, Dad left through the garage with Samuel. His phone remained behind. His car remained behind. Everything looked as though he had vanished. Then Samuel showed me something else. Security footage from a camera across the street. At 7:18 a.m., Eric's Mercedes arrived. Natalie stepped out. They entered Dad's house. They stayed for 26 minutes. When they left, Natalie was carrying a folder. "The will," Mr. Collins said. I looked at him. "His will?" He nodded. They thought it was Walter's original. Eric sank into the chair. Natalie whispered, "We just wanted to know what it said." Samuel stared at her. "No. You wanted to know what you were getting." Mr. Collins opened his briefcase again. "The document you took was an outdated copy Walter deliberately left in his desk." Natalie looked up. "What?" "Your grandfather changed his estate plan months ago." Her tears stopped. And there it was again. That flicker. Greed, fighting its way through fear. "How much did he leave me?" I couldn't believe she had asked. "Not after everything." Mr. Collins looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "That depends." "On what?" "On whether Walter Bennett is dead." Natalie froze. Eric slowly lifted his head. I felt my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Mr. Collins closed the folder. "You've both made one assumption since Tuesday." He looked toward the entrance of the storage facility. "You never actually saw Walter's body." Footsteps sounded outside. Slow. Steady. Familiar. Natalie turned toward the open door, and the color vanished from her face. Dad stepped into Unit 3017. Alive. He looked directly at his granddaughter. "Hello, Natalie." She stumbled backward. "Grandpa?" Dad's expression didn't change. "No," he said quietly. "According to you, I'm dead." Natalie stared at my father as if the dead had actually walked back into the room. Her lips moved, but nothing came out. Dad stepped inside slowly. He wasn't smiling anymore. Neither was I. Eric stood so quickly that the chair scraped across the concrete. "This is insane." Dad looked at him. "No, Eric. Insane was breaking into my house because you thought I couldn't stop you. We didn't break in. You used the spare key I gave Natalie for emergencies." Dad's eyes moved to my daughter. "I suppose my being alive became the emergency." Natalie finally found her voice. "Grandpa, I can explain. I've heard your explanations. We were scared." "So was I." That silenced her. Dad walked toward the monitor. "Do you know what frightened me most?" Natalie shook her head. "It wasn't losing the money." He looked at the forged insurance document. "It wasn't even discovering you had copied my financial information." His voice softened. "It was realizing my granddaughter had started seeing my death as a solution to her problems." Natalie broke. She sank into the chair, crying into both hands. "I never wanted you dead." "Maybe not." Dad nodded toward the paperwork. "But you wanted everything that became easier if I wasn't around." Nobody spoke. Then, Mr. Collins removed one final document from his briefcase. Dad took it. "My new estate plan." Natalie slowly looked up. Eric stared at the pages. Dad didn't read numbers. He didn't need to. "My lake house has been placed in a trust. When I'm gone, it will be sold." Natalie swallowed. "We're come." "And the money?" "A portion goes to your father." She looked at me. "The rest funds a program providing legal assistance to elderly people facing financial exploitation by relatives." Natalie closed her eyes. There was something almost poetic about it. The money she had tried to control would someday protect people from families doing exactly what she had done. "What about me?" she whispered. Dad looked at her for a long time. "You get $1. Eric laughed bitterly. $1? "Yes." "Why even bother?" Dad's answer came immediately. "So nobody can claim I forgot her." Eric's expression hardened. "This family deserves each other." He headed toward the door. Samuel stopped him. "You may want to stay." "Why?" "Because copies of the forged insurance application and unauthorized withdrawals have already been provided to investigators." Eric turned toward Natalie. "You told me nobody could prove anything." Dad looked at him. That was before a dead man started collecting evidence. For the first time that day I laughed. Just once. Natalie didn't. She looked at me instead. Dad, please. And despite everything, hearing that word hurt. Because I remembered another Natalie. The little girl who used to run into my arms when thunderstorms frightened her. The teenager who cried when her first dog died. The young woman whose hand I held walking down the aisle. Greed hadn't erased those memories. It had simply made them painful. I love you, I told her. Her eyes filled again. But loving you doesn't mean protecting you from what you chose to do. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. Then we walked out together. 6 months later, Natalie accepted a plea agreement connected to the forged documents and unauthorized transfers. Eric faced separate charges related to the financial scheme. Dad never returned to the lake house. He sold it himself. Not because Natalie had won. Because he finally understood that a house filled with memories could become a prison if you stayed only because you were afraid to let go. He moved into a small cottage 20 minutes from me. Every Sunday, we had breakfast together. Sometimes we talked about Natalie. Sometimes we didn't. Then one morning, while pouring coffee, Dad looked at me and smiled. Funny thing. What? They thought the worst thing I could leave them was nothing. He sat across from me. But nothing wasn't what destroyed them. What did? The belief that everything was already theirs. I never forgot that. Because inheritance can reveal something ugly about a family. But money doesn't create greed. It exposes it. And sometimes the people counting what they'll receive after you're gone forget one very important thing. You're still here. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Could you ever forgive Natalie after what she did? Or would that betrayal end the relationship forever? And if you enjoy stories about family, betrayal, justice, and the secrets people hide behind closed doors, subscribe to the Stories Time Forgot. And tell me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next story.